Hello everybody and welcome back to Purgatory Ironworks. I am your host Trenton Ty, and today I have a pretty awesome show for you. Now, we've been doing some work with some woodworking tools, which blacksmithing and woodworking back in the day went hand in hand. And when I say woodworking, I mean lumberjacking. Timber was absolutely king in the early United States, like millions upon millions of trees shipped down rivers, and all those tools had to be made by your blacksmiths. Now, one of the biggest things about doing woodworking back in the day were sleeper ties or railroad ties. And that's basically where you'd take about an 8-foot chunk of tree and you'd actually knock two sides off of it. And there were millions upon millions of these things made so that the railroad tracks could be laid out west. When you cut that tree though, you usually rolled it up on two other pieces of tree to give yourself a little bit of height, and then you would use a series of axes, most notably the broad axe, to actually make the flat sides on there. The problem is when you put that tree on your two runners, it would have a tendency to roll left or right. So in order to hold it in place while you stood on top of it and chopped dangerously close to your toes, you had a device that was known as a Logdog, and this guy actually pinned the tree to the tie that was on the bottom and kept it from rolling left and right. So we're going to make one of those today. Now, this is a relatively simple item. It's going to be a piece of 1/2 inch square and a piece of 1 inch by 3/8 flat bar. Now, admittedly, this is a bit of a light duty piece. Most of the examples I have seen are dealing with really large logs, and most of the time this guy right here is at least 5/8 or 3/4 of an inch thick. So understand we're just doing a baby version today. Now, what will happen was this piece, relatively simple, we will actually draw this out to a point and point it down. This will actually be driven into one log. And on this side, we're actually going to put ourselves about a 1/2 inch rivet hole, because you just don't turn both of them down. You have this piece that actually is riveted and can pivot, so that no matter the size of your log, you've got a little bit of flexibility in how you can drive it in. So we're going to start with our piece right here. We'll get ourselves a point, turn it down, and then punch ourselves and drift ourselves a hole. So let's get cranking. So we got ourselves a good heat. And we're going to start by putting our point on here. Now, when I do my tapers, I usually put my point on first, and then I actually increase the angle of the taper. So now I'm going to go right here to the horn of the anvil and draw it out. And that's good enough for government work. So now I'll take one more heat, and I'm probably going to give myself about a good 4-inch turn right there. And that point is good enough. Remember, we're just hammering this into a big old tree. It's not like we're going to use this to bust a 2x4. Now, one of the most amazing things about doing this particular type of work is the fact that if you go into almost any museum, you're going to find those woodworking tools that were made by the blacksmith. One of the most rewarding things that I've done is that when I make pieces like this, I can go into that museum, and outside of a couple of 100 years worth of rust and patina, they look identical to the originals. That's got to be one of the most awesome things about doing this blacksmith work, is the connection that you end up with when you're doing this stuff, because you're making a tool that functions, and there's kind of either it works or it doesn't. And there were millions of blacksmiths making millions of these pieces, and there's a continuity, there's a similarity in all these pieces. And for me, that's one of the most awesome things about doing this historical work. Now, super simply, we're gonna figure if that's good enough for about 4 inches, somewhere along in there, maybe a little bit more. This doesn't have to be a right angle bend. Very few of them have I ever seen done as a right angle bend. Even though this was hammered, it usually wasn't enough of a problem for them to actually upset this. But very simply, there we go. This guy right here can be driven into our log. So here we go, folks. You can see we've got our spike here. Now, coming over to this side, since this is 1/2 inch material, and I do want to put a 1/2 inch hole in here, I've only got a few options. Now, I can hammer this flat, spread it out and punch it, but that's going to make a very weak piece. So what we're going to do here is we're actually going to slit this piece. We're not going to punch it. I'm going to use a chisel to actually cut a line in there. And what this does is this leaves more material around this outside instead of just flattening it. This is a technique that you use, especially if you're using bar, when you want to put a 1/2 inch rivet through 1/2 inch wide material. You have to slit and drift. You don't want to punch it. So let's take a heat. Now to do this, of course, I'm going to need a hand free, so we're going to use our hold down. I have my chisel, and right behind my anvil where you can't see it, I've got my can of water. Now there's a lot of guys out there that will use their coal powder and beeswax mix. Material of this thickness, it's usually not really necessary. I mean, it's good practice, but I rarely find that it's needed if your punches are done correctly. I don't have a lot of problem with this sticking excessively, so I tend just to usually go in pretty raw. It's good practice, but in stuff this thin, you're usually pretty good. So let's take a quick look, and you guys can see that we've got a pretty good slot punch there. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to take another heat, and I'll come in from this back side. Come down once again here. Okay, looks like we have a punch through here, and we do. You guys can see that both sides have been cut. It's a little puckered on this side. And now what we're going to do is we're going to use our 1/2 inch drift. That's not a 1/2 inch drift. Here's my 1/2 inch drift. There are many like it, but this one is mine. So what will happen is you can see that on this drift, it actually has a square or rather a rectangular or flatter pieces on there, and that's so that it goes into that slit. So now we'll heat this guy up and simply drive this through and open it up. Now you will absolutely begin to be able to tell when you see these punched holes, the difference between where they've actually slit it and opened it up or where they punched it and just expanded the hole. They look quite different. Most of the times where you see that nice pick on the fence and there's a super nice, very even, pooched out hole, that's usually where they have slit it and drifted it as opposed to punched it and expanded it. So we're gonna slip her right here. And again, this is where you just get to go all gangbusters on the punch. Or drift, rather. Look how awesome that is. Check that out. Now we can certainly come back in here and clean this up, which we will. We'll even everything. I'll put that drift back in there and I'll go ahead and even these sides. But you can see the effect of the slit in the drift. Whereas if we had punched this, these sides would have been a lot thinner and it just would not have been a nicer product. I'm going to slide my drift back in. And I'm going to move it to its thickest portion. And now I am going to come in and just clean up the far side. Now I'm going to tell you that it's pretty much absolutely unnecessary to worry about really making this nice. It is a punched hole in a utility item. But as a matter of practice, if you're going to be doing this stuff and you want to make it look nice, it never hurts to take the extra time to practice on some piece that is not critical. So our piece is ready to go. All right, guys, there's our first piece. Really nice punched hole there. And now we're going to take our 1 inch by 3/8 bar. I will make a taper on this side here. Now, interesting fact. I have seen two versions of these Logdogs, and One, where this piece right here is actually done this way, whereas the actual cutting edge goes left and right in reference to the flat. However, there are other versions where this piece has been hammered down to go this way. And it finally dawned on me exactly why that was. It depends on what you're hammering this into. Because if you have your log this way and you have a runner down here, the log's grain is running this way and the runner's is running that way. So in that scenario, this piece can be hammered into the log, and this piece, it needs to be in line with the grain. However, if you had two logs side by side, you would actually need to have this piece running like that, so that when you drove these pieces into the logs, they were both in line with the grain. Today, we're just going to do the simple version of this. I'm going to draw this out into a taper because this would be for a log on a set of runners. We're going to taper the top of it because this is where it's going to be struck. So as we're making it, tapering this down can help us a little bit with the mushrooming issue, and then we will slit and drift this piece, make ourselves a rivet, and then we're going to have ourselves a log dog. So guys, pretty super simply, we're going to make ourselves a sharper taper here. Remember, when you're doing those fine tapers, work toward that edge so that your hammer can fall below the surface of your anvil. You don't get that nasty bounce back. And that's good. Looking good. So let's flip her around. Let's taper our top and we'll slit and drift. Now guys, again, this is just to help prevent some of the mushrooming over time. So we're just going to give ourselves a slight taper right here. Almost all of the examples I have seen do this to help with the mushrooming issue. Okay, good enough. We'll come back, take a heat, and then we're going to slit that joker right there in the middle. So guys, as you're growing in your blacksmith's ability, one of the things you want to keep in mind are when you add these techniques, what different worlds it opens up. So after you're competent with your hammer, really the next stage is learning how to put things together, because if you can make single items, great, but to make complicated items, you've got to be able to join metal. That means forge welds, that means slitting and drifting, that means rivets. It's really the second tier of education when you're going to be making these items. So make sure and practice your hammer work, but also take some time just to practice these techniques here as well, because this is what's going to allow you to get to that next tier of quality work. We've got an excellent heat. I'm going to come in here and I'm going to eyeball this bad boy. And it doesn't seem, no matter how much I eyeball this, I almost always get it wrong, but we're just gonna go for it today. Remember, when you're working, to turn your punches and chisels around. This can actually help correct for any imperfections in the chisel or the item. It will also help you from getting this thing, keep this thing from getting stuck. And let's take a look. Yeah, we're close there. That's going to be good. Let's take one more heat and open it up from the backside. I am going to pop this in here real quick because I want to put that cold spot. Now, I was having trouble judging exactly where that was coming through on that backside, so I went ahead and dropped it just one more cut on the other side just to kind of give myself a better guide. And that did the job right there. So I'm going to move over here. Now notice as I'm doing that, just like when you're punching, that I'm moving this around the hole so that I'm actually supporting the sides evenly, or as even as I can without a fitted hole. And look at there, she's looking good. One more heat, and now we take our drift and open this thing up. Now, one thing you're always going to have to fight just a little bit is figuring out what width chisel to use for what drifts. Ideally, when you saw us punch that piece first, there's just enough space for the drift to go through there that it actually makes the metal swell out, but it's tight enough that you don't get a fish mouth from the cut. Balancing that is going to take you a little bit of time and adjustment of chisels. And a lot of the times when I do my work, I have particular chisel paired with particular drifts, because if I have that width, I know that I'm actually going to have just the right amount to get a good swell in the material and leave no fish mouths. Now on this one, just to kind of give you an FYI, I drove this one pretty deep. So what's going to happen here is I've actually added extra links to that inside circumference because of those square edges. So the problem is I'm probably going to have a little bit of slop in that hole. It's not going to matter in this case, but just be aware of it. All right, guys, here we go. I'm going to lay this over the Pritchell hole. I'm going to drop her in here. I'm going to grab her with the tongs. I just want a little bit more control over the piece. Strike one. Now you can see already that I've got a little bit of gappage around the sides because of how deep I drove that chisel. Not going to be a problem. Not going to be an issue. And there we have a good punched hole. Now one thing I am going to do is I'm going to make sure and keep this flat. I am going to have a mating surface on that side, so I don't want I want as few undulations as possible, but she's going to do the trick. So guys, today it is of course sweltering in the July heat here in Georgia, and I'm a glutton for punishment. So now normally you could just walk over to the box and grab yourself a prefabricated rivet, but today we're going to do this the hard way, the really hard way. Now you can use a series of vise inserts and clamps to make your rivet heads, but we're going to freehand ourselves a rivet today. Now again, remember, there is no excuse for good craftsmanship, but if you're going to be in business, sometimes you have to make sure it functions, and if it functions, she's good to go. Remember, nobody has ever gotten stabbed in the neck with a railroad spike knife and they said, oh, it's not even tempered, right? So what we're going to do is I'm starting with some 1/2 inch square. I'm going to begin the process of riveting the head after I've knocked the corners off, and we're going to make ourselves a rivet. Now folks, since this is round stock, square stock, it means it has a little bit more material than standard round, which is good. That gives us something to play with. So I'm first going to take those sharp corners off, and then I'm going to switch to a lighter hammer to start mushrooming that top. Now I'm going to keep the heat high so that I can really mushroom that piece there. All right, one more time. Remember to try to keep this as even as possible as you back this up. Okay, looking pretty good so far. And really and truly, though it's not that big, beautiful button head, that should serve our purposes. Now you are going to get some swelling back here. So once we cut this loose, we may have to take a little bit of time just to make certain that this is going to be of the right diameter for the 1/2 inch hole. But that's okay. We'll check that here in just a second. Now, this is where those extra tools really come in handy. Having a vise that has an insert that can clamp onto the side stock so it will hold the material while you make that nice big button head and you upset the top, always a great way to go. But understand that you can do it the hard way. It may not look great, but it will function. And at the end of the day, it's usually all that you're worried about. Now I know I need about 1 inch worth of material, so I'm gonna give myself just about 2 inches, just so I have something to work with. You can always cut down, you're just very difficult to add material. Choo! Now, of course, with smaller pieces, you have the aggravation of having the right tongs. A piece this small that you're trying to forge out, if you do not have the correct tongs, even if you do have the correct tongs, it's going to be a pain in the hind end. This is an example of what I said in my book about the sliding glass door. Just because you can do some things doesn't mean you should. All right, folks, I've got a taper on here, and boy, is this thing looking janky, but that's all right, because what we're going to do, we're going to double the jankiness. Now, this piece is going to be a super tight fit, but what I'm going to do here is I'm going to heat this piece and the rivet, and then I'm going to drive this piece in there. We're going to double the chaos. Let's do it. Guys, we're going to set this right there. We're going to grab our hot rivet. And we're going to cram it in. Bam! Look at that. What a beauty. So, and she's even a little wobbly, which is exactly what we want. So you can see that, now, will it spin in here? Probably not. But as long as it spins on the other one, we're good to go. But now we have a rivet, and I'm going to heat up our second piece for our spike, and we're going to get it on here. We'll make sure and cut it to the right length. And then, boys and girls, we're going to be good to go. All right, guys, so I'm going to slide this right here. Oh, look at that. And she'll actually be able to turn reasonably. How about that? Okay, so I clearly need to clip a little bit off of my rivet here. No problem at all. I should be able to knock everything out just like that. So I'll cut my rivet, and now I know I have a rivet that actually spans these pieces. And again, you can see these insides are absolutely not perfect. Not gonna matter, because what's gonna happen when we heat that rivet, this whole thing's hot, we're gonna twist these things back and forth, and she's gonna move, and that's all we need her to do. All right, we're gonna trim this about a 1/2 inch. And again, not having the right tongs, or tongs that really don't hold this piece well, can be a problem, but looks like we're getting away with it today. So let's get everything assembled, and we're gonna be a heating and a beating. Folks, we're gonna start the assembly. We'll put that into place. Very quickly, we'll come over, pop this one into place, give her the tippy taps, turn everything over and really seat her now, and back over. And let's start mushrooming our head here. Look at there. I'm going to heat this whole thing up and continue the process, cleaning up those rivets. Then we'll make sure she flexes, and boys and girls, we may be close to done. Guys, we got a good heat. I'm going to roll that piece on over, clean up this back side. All right, she is nice and set now. So what we're just going to happen now is we're going to go over to our vise and we're going to work this free. So guys, I've still got a dull red heat, and I've cheated this a little bit because that 1/2-inch bar right there is kind of the weakest member of all this. So what I did is I used my watering cup to cool it so that I strengthened this bar, because if there's anything that's going to bend, it's going to be that. Look at that. Let's work her free. Man, check that out. Free range of motion. That was a janky rivet. However, what has happened is now, even despite the jankiness, it is now a functional piece capable of holding any logs you wish. How about that? As they say, ba-bam. Now, one of the great things about this, and I'm really glad I got to put this on camera for you guys. I'm glad that I went with the cruddy rivet as opposed to the manufacturer one, because check this out. Look, that janky hole and that janky rivet can be made to function very effectively. Look at that. Look how awesome that is. So guys, again, there's always a war between doing things the way that you're supposed to do them and then figuring out the things that work. And so many of these pieces that I have seen from the museums would be janky by my standards. I'm like, man, you know, because I kind of venerate the blacksmith of antiquity of being these very capable guys, and they were. This did not need to be inlaid with gold to serve the purpose of the lumberjack in the deep forest. It needed to function. I'm going to tell you something. It functions. That's it. Game over. Now we can, as a matter of practice, always do better and more consistent work. And that's what industry did. Industry, this is one of those things that we don't really think about. When we can go to an Ace Hardware and pick up a brand of pliers, go across the country and find the identical brand, and those items are identical, that's a huge thing. That's what the blacksmiths were trying to get to. And in fact, they did. That is why we created the industry. But down on the ground, in the trenches, something like this will work fine. So there's always these warring philosophies, especially for you new guys getting in there. Now, you new guys, we usually call the stitch counters, because you're the one that goes around at the historical festival looking at people's collars and counting the number of stitches to make sure that they are historically accurate. There's a place for that, but when you get into the actual work, you're going to find that the rules change a bit, and that sometimes you have to back up off of those hardcore philosophies and do's what works. You got to do's what works, folks. The heat's getting to me. But having said that, before I have any more sweat beads go down the Grand Canyon, I want to thank you folks so much for being here. Again, these videos, if you're enjoying them, do the thing, click and like and subscribe, all that kind of stuff. If you have questions for me, put them in the comments. But please take note, if you do enjoy these videos are absolutely 100% brought to you by the generous support of our Patreons. People like Mark Blosser, Cory Cooper, some of our biggest supporters for years. If you really like these videos and you want to help out, go over to patreon.com/purgatoryironworks. We've got behind the scenes content, all that kind of good stuff. But guys, now I got to go grab a towel. It's July in Georgia, and I hope you enjoyed the show. You guys take care.